Welcome to our virtual salon with the World Food Program. My name is Darlene Damm, and I'm one of our chairs of Global Grand Challenges at Singularity University and lead our impact. We've partnered with the World Food Program for the last 3 to 4 years, and today we're going to be talking with them about the topic of food security and also how the COVID-19 pandemic is impacting them. Today, we're going to be speaking with Bernhard Kowatsch, who's head of the World Food Program Innovation Accelerator, and also Carmen Burbano, who's the director of the World Food Program School Feeding Division.
Thank you so much, Darlene, for having us today. It's a pleasure to be here and talk about the challenges in the fight against hunger and what we can also do now because of COVID-19 to really help the most vulnerable people globally. Now, as a World Food Program, we are the world's most effective humanitarian agency fighting hunger, both saving lives in emergency, but also changing lives for people so that they are sustainably lifted out of hunger. Now, unfortunately, because of COVID-19, what has happened that the people in acute hunger, so people who are really suffering from hunger and are in risk of dying because of famine, the number of people has more than almost doubled. We're expecting that 265 million people in 2020 are at risk of dying from hunger. So this is really an acute crisis that we have to deal with globally. And so as a global phenomenon, while we are oftentimes seeing the challenges in developed countries and what's going on, we are yet to see a lot of the most severe impacts in developing countries, both because there will be restrictions or risks that people or governments put restrictions on trade of goods, but also movement of people in place, as well as curfews. So a lot of people who are currently supporting their livelihoods just by daily work, they are at risk of suffering from hunger. So there's of acute need for us as a World Food Program to care for those people. Similarly, what we will hear from Carmen is it's also an issue if schools are closed. So all of those children that have relied on receiving meals and nutritious meals in schools, they are also at risk of not receiving the proper nutrition and education for the future. Now, what we are doing as a World Food Program Innovation Accelerator is we are focusing on what can we do in terms of finding innovation and startup that can help us also specifically in this crisis to avert the hunger that people are facing. So we're looking for innovative solutions both in emergency response, supply chain, things that use data or that enable social distancing for serving those vulnerable populations in developing countries and making sure that we can help them in the best shape or form possible.
So how has the pandemic impacted the Innovation Accelerator? I know that you quickly pivoted a lot of your work into the digital realm.
So we as World Food Program Innovation Accelerator, we are operating our global program for developing countries. So that means that what we used to do, so we're looking for innovations globally. So innovators can come from the US, from developed countries, from developing countries. So we're still looking for global solutions across anywhere where we can find them, and the best and brightest minds who can actually come forward with solutions that we can use. And the next step for us is to typically work on an innovation bootcamp. Now, already a couple of weeks ago, we did the first of our innovation bootcamps fully virtual. So for us, because we've been running a global program, it wasn't such a big change, but we immediately changed it so to make sure that we can continue and have impact right now to accelerate innovations. And so what we are doing also is with our field colleagues, so colleagues who are in those developing countries. So as World Food Program, we reach about 100 million people in 83 countries across the globe. So we have colleagues in those countries, so they are still there and we can actually help field test and pilot innovations or startups that could help us avert the crisis in those countries right now.
Carmen, so tell us more about your work. Millions of children must be affected by what's happening right now in your school feeding programs.
Yes, well, when the crisis started, we quickly realized that one of the biggest effects of the mitigation measures of the school closures was that a really large number of kids were going to go without school meals. And so we started keeping track of how many countries were closing their schools. With the information that we already had, we could quickly come up with a calculation that has been updated every day. The latest information that we have is that globally, around 370 million children are missing out on school meals. So that's what's worrying us right now. It's those children where the meal is really a lifeline. It's in many cases the only meal that they get a day. And it's also a burden to their families. They used to count on that meal in school, and these are families that in many cases are already struggling to make ends meet. And so now they have to figure out how to compensate for that loss already with quite a complicated situation. So it's those kids that we're worried about at the moment, and we're particularly worried about children in Africa and in the Middle East. Around 70 of those million children are in those two areas. And so what we've done is we've paired up with partners, specifically with UNICEF. We just launched an initiative yesterday, basically joining forces to focus our efforts on 30 of the most fragile countries so that we can work together to ensure that those children are getting support now and also will continue to get support when schools start to reopen.
So how are you reaching them, or how are the governments that you're working with actually reaching them and making sure they still have access to food?
Governments all around the world have been very creative to find ways to reach their children. And very quickly we started noticing that they were repurposing or retooling their programs. Right now we know that around 70 countries around the world have found solutions to reach at least some of the most vulnerable children. And the way that they're doing it predominantly is by converting the food into what we call take-home rations. So that's basically food that is repackaged into whatever the child would have eaten, for example, that month or for a period of 2 weeks. And then in some countries, like in Honduras or in Libya, the teachers are taking that food to the students' houses. And in Honduras, we've seen teachers on their bikes, on their scooters, with the food on their backs, and they go to the houses of the students and deliver that, and also check up on them and their families. In other cases, the food is being distributed at the school, so the school is the distribution point, and then they call the communities maybe by neighborhood or by grade level or something to avoid big crowds coming into the schools. And then other countries, especially in Latin America, we also see that in the US, in Europe, our information is that they're converting the programs into cash. So it's basically cash transfers or vouchers that families can then go and buy in the market, in the supermarket, the equivalent of the food that the child would have received at home. So a variety of different solutions have been found. And at the moment, WFP and governments are doing their best to make sure that those children are still covered.
You know, one of the things that I was hoping with this interview that we could do is help the world understand, help people who would love to help you figure out how to contribute. Do you have different, like a wish list of ways that people could help you?
Well, the first and most important support that we can receive is always financial support so that we can continue to support these children right now while schools are closed, but also what we're doing is preparing for what will come. And what will come is schools are going to start to reopen. And our major concern at the moment is that the longer kids stay out of school, the least likely they are to come back. And especially girls, especially older kids, they get married off, they get pregnant very quickly, they get put to work, and then parents just don't send them back to school. So what we're trying to do also is prepare governments and prepare our offices for a back to school campaign, and really putting all of our efforts in making sure that when children come back, those meals are there, because those are the best incentives to bring them back to school. We know that from other experiences. We know that from the Ebola crisis, for example, that girls were more likely to be back in school if there was a meal promised in school. And so that's what we're trying to do. Now, we've calculated that for the remainder of the year, and in those 30 priority countries that we have singled out as the most fragile, we've identified 10 million children that really need our support. For that, we need $300 million to actually be able to do our job between now and the end of the year. So the first way of supporting our work is providing the financing that we need so that we can go to those countries and continue supporting those children now and when schools reopen.
So another way that people can help is by using some of the apps and some of the solutions that have been already developed, like Share the Meal, which is a really important application that WFP uses already to fundraise for our school feeding operations worldwide. And the other one, which is also interesting and important, is a page called freerice.com, which for every word that you get right, it's a little game, we get specific amounts of rice. And so that also supports our operations. In general, the spirit would be to find ways in which we can work with different communities in the US or in Europe that want to help, that could match or pair funding that the World Food Program can then get for our own operations.
And what are some of the different ways that technology can help you?
One of the things that has been exacerbated by the crisis is our ability to go out to the field, to the countries, and also to the schools themselves, and be able to monitor these programs, support the teachers, support the parents, the children themselves. And so one of the things that we're looking for and we're developing with the Accelerator is digital solutions, for example, to monitor attendance of children, the stocks that we have in school, how much are children eating. If we can get teachers with an app that they can monitor from their own phone, and we can get their reporting every day, that would make our life a lot easier.
So you just shared a bit about how technology can help with monitoring. Are there other pieces that you wish you had, that you wish existed in the world that would help you meet your mission?
What we are actually doing at the WFP Innovation Accelerator is what you can compare like Silicon Valley's core mission to, right? Like where it's like, you know, innovating wicked problems and finding solutions for things that haven't been thought of before. So to just highlight a few things that you think would exist like in developed countries, but we are actually using them to fight hunger and also in emergency response right now. One of the examples that I would refer to is like, it's actually called an eShop application. It's eShop and delivery, which has been innovated by our colleagues in our Somalia country office, and is actually something where people can order online and have food delivered to their homes in Somalia. So imagine that. So something that you maybe are using for whatever your favorite food delivery app is, we are actually using this now to keep people safe in developing countries. Another innovation that we're really excited about is called Building Blocks. It's one of our scaling innovations, and what they're using is they are developing an e-wallet using Ethereum blockchain technology. It's actually a project or an innovation that we had brought to Singularity University in the first week when we started supporting them and really benefiting from the Silicon Valley and like the cutting edge technology environment. And so only after 6 months, they already like from scratch, like from only having a concept, they developed this e-wallet system to serve 10,000 refugees in Jordan. And right now they just expanded, like, so in Jordan it's now reaching 100,000 people already. And they just expanded for another 50,000 people in Cox's Bazar for Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. And like they are already incorporating the challenges of COVID-19. So what they're doing, instead of using a fingerprint to authenticate that they used before, now they're using a card with a QR code, and that's contactless. People can go to a shop and buy on blockchain the food that they actually are supposed to buy. And maybe a last innovation to mention, and this is something that you might also relate to, like people who listen to this. We're working on an innovation that we call Food ATM. Now, it literally does what it says. So like, you know, an ATM, you go there, you get cash out. So we have been working on this actually already as of last year as a convenience for the people, as a service for them to say like, you know, what can we do to make the experience of receiving food assistance better? What could we possibly do? And so this is where one of the innovations that was submitted was a food ATM. And the food ATM is now being deployed in Sudan and a couple of other countries already, where it's being used that people can go there in essentially social distance and still get the food assistance that are required to stay safe, stay healthy, and to actually live a healthy life despite, there might be areas under lockdown and there might be social distancing measures in place.
Bernhard, and could you also share a bit more about the Share the Meal app that Carmen mentioned?
So the idea behind Share the Meal is fairly simple. It only costs 50 cents to feed a child for a day. So, and imagine if more people know that this is possible, you can actually share your meal. So like while you have dinner with friends or you have lunch at home with your family, you feel good, you can actually share a meal with a child in need, like for only 50 cents for a day. And like if we do this, one person, that's only 50 cents, but using social media, using platforms, together we can achieve so much more. So far it's over 2 million people who are already using the app that have shared a total of 60 million meals. So that's $30 million that have already been donated for hungry children in developing countries in school meals. And this is really where like the power of a movement is really important. It's like, 50 cents maybe not a big amount of money for you, but like together with others, those 50 cents can be an important part for providing food for people and children who are otherwise not having anything to eat. At the WFP Innovation Accelerator, we're looking for innovations and startups that can help us in these types of crises. So right now, imagine like COVID-19, it's not only about money. So yes, people can donate to us in the World Food Program and keep our life-saving operations going. In addition, we're looking for companies who can actually provide services to us or like capabilities that we actually don't have access to or have to buy right now, and also like to the best and brightest ideas out there. So if you're a startup founder and you have been founding a couple of startups, maybe the next unicorn you found is one where you have actual impact for some of the most vulnerable people. And we've seen this before where some of our advisors have taken concepts and actually like are now building like educational platforms for single moms where they now become data scientists and really like make a bigger impact rather than just making another app that has more profit. That's one way. Now, the other way that we're looking at that is really like there's so much talent out there. Artificial intelligence engineers, there's people who are working on marketing, who are doing, who can help actually tell the story in storytelling. Like there's lots of capacities out there where everybody can make a difference, and it just depends on like, individual levels may vary. Like you might be a representative in a company that the company can actually provide something, or you could actually do something privately to mentor a startup to do something, or you can download Share the Meal and share a meal with a child in need.
Some of the challenges that we normally have with school feeding, which are in a way exacerbated by the crisis, is how to handle the side of the purchase of the food and the connection with local farmers. There's always been an issue both for our own programs and the World Food Program, but also how governments manage these programs, in the sense of how do you send cash to smallholder farmers that might be selling very small quantities of food to schools? How to manage the cash ecosystem without having excessive bureaucracy and complications, how to make it more intuitive, less friction in terms of that interaction with the farmers. And then the other big block that we have and constant challenge has been, if we're doing these transactions locally, and we always say the more local the better, because the food is going to be fresh, children are going to get food that is produced by maybe their parents or their communities. They're probably going to get more nutritious food. So all of that, of course, is something we want to continue to support and continue to figure out how we do. But there's an element also of food safety. So if the transactions and the purchases are happening very, very locally, then we have an issue of how do we ensure that every egg, that all the vegetables, that the meat and blah, 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 are properly transported, sold, and then are safe for children to eat. So those are some of the things that we are currently struggling with in terms of solutions that we need help with. On the bigger picture, school meals programs are what we call the largest social program in the world. It's the largest safety net supporting children from vulnerable families all across the world. And people in the US might be very familiar with this. The school lunch program is really important for children from poor households all across the States. The same is true in Europe and in most of the developed countries. And so that same figure, of course, becomes really important when we're talking about low-income countries, and within those countries, the poorest families. So before COVID, we estimated that around 380 million children were receiving food in different countries in the world in one way or another. And as we were talking about before, most of those children now are not receiving the programs because the schools are closed. What we would like to see is a return, a reopening of schools, and when those schools reopen, meals restored to those children so that they can come back. The World Food Program supports 70 countries, around 70 countries with their own programs. And in 2019, we supported 17.3 million children with these meals a day. And when we do that, when we support these particular countries, it means that we're supporting the most vulnerable, the poorest of the poor. And these are children that really come to school to feed themselves. It's probably the only meal they get a day. And so our support is really crucial for those children.
Thank you. So then I'd like to talk to each of you a little bit about how you're currently working with different actors in society, how you're working with corporations, how are they supporting your work, where do you need more help, how you're working with startups, and also the role of governments.
We have lots of partnerships with the private sector at the moment, trying to unblock and solve some of the issues that I've mentioned. So for example, on supply chain, we work with companies like Sodexo, an expert in catering systems around the world, about how to set up more efficient procurement systems, more efficient kitchens, centralized kitchens in some countries, how to train people that are cooking for the children and make sure that they have proper hygiene practices, proper food safety practices, and that has been a very, very valuable partnership. We also partner with Mastercard. That's another really big partner for us that is helping us mainly with both the digital agenda that we have and trying to find different solutions to this issue of cash and how to build a better cash ecosystem for school feeding programs and payments for different vendors, but also cost benefit analysis for the programs. These programs are incredibly valuable, not just because we're feeding children, but because by connecting them to education, by providing them with better nutrition, by connecting them with local markets and making sure that smallholder farmers are benefiting, the benefits to society are huge. And our analysis at the moment are pointing to a cost benefit ratio of 1 to 20. So for every dollar invested in school feeding, about $20 are given back to society in the form of more productivity of the children, and basically they become better adults, more productive adults. And that is all thanks to the calculations that we have done with Mastercard. We have other private sector companies that support us through the Accelerator that are constantly trying to help us unblock some of the issues that we're finding.
Absolutely. No, like I think this is where we would not be able to do our life-saving work and also work in lifting people out of hunger sustainably without the support of governments, foundations, private sector companies, but also high net worth individuals and startups, to be honest. And it's very interesting, for instance, where like in the past people would have thought, well, you know, who is interested in like actually like this type of development aid? Well, not surprisingly, a lot of startup founders actually have this urge for, well, they're looking for meaning. Like we actually have a lot of people who are experienced startup founders. Maybe they had 2 or 3 exits, and then afterwards they're approaching us, say like, I've been working on this idea. Could that fit, and is that something that can actually work in a developing country? Like we have had also startups from the US, like Silicon Valley unicorns, startups with $1 billion valuation, who said like, well, part of our mission is to do good in the world. So we want to also expand our impact in developing countries. So we have corporate partnerships also with large tech companies like Google or corporations last year. Like for instance, like we've been working on a joint Accelerator bootcamp and an innovation program together with a company called Cargill, which is one of the largest companies in the world actually working on grains and food. So like it's one of those areas where there is oftentimes a match of mutual interest, where it's like, okay, it can be in our interest of ending hunger or like providing emergency assistance, but it can also be in the interest of the company to actually, like, from employee engagement perspective, but also from perspective of it's in the core of their mission, because they want to create good in the world and actually have a more better, meaningful contribution towards society across the globe. And I think this is where it's very interesting, especially when it comes to a lot of the technological developments. One of the early stage innovations that we've been working on, for instance, is to use blockchain technology on the supply chain from Port of Djibouti into Ethiopia to digitize bill of lading, shipping documents on the journey. Now, one of the reasons why we as World Food Program have been able to do that is because there is no doubt that we have the benefit of the most vulnerable people in mind. So that's why we're able to work with the custom clearance agents, with the governments, with the local communities, with the businesses, so that they know this is something that we want to create a better world. At the same time, I'm sure there's other companies like forwarding agents, tech companies out there that are working on blockchain solutions for supply chain. So there's definitely an area where, like, maybe that's not possible like in the US right now, but it could be something that we might be able to pilot it in developing countries.
How, over the last, say, 5 years, have you noticed a change in how you work with technologists? I know when I first started my career, technology was so expensive and it would break and it was kind of clunky. And so it was hard to use in terms of solving social challenges. But have you seen changes over the last 5 years?
So we started our Innovation Accelerator 5 years ago. And really from the outset, when we kicked off the work of our accelerator until now, I think there has been a massive development in terms of like people stepping up and people getting into this social impact world. And I think even right now, when you think about COVID-19, like it's something that really is in people's minds, where they say it's not only about like going to a hackathon on the weekend, but they really want to make a contribution towards a greater social good. And whether that is like, well, they're supporting like with technology, like maybe a local food bank, or they're supporting a charity locally that is doing something to organize volunteers, or it's to help international development like school meals programs. Like I think there's lots of goodwill and lots of engagement on behalf of people who have the technology and the tech savviness, not only to hack on new apps to do something and solve problems that you might find in front of your doorstep, but also wicked problems in developing countries that haven't been solved before. And it's definitely because technology has become way more achievable and affordable for people. Like think about cloud computing, think about what it costs to actually build an app, think about like the ability to actually use mobile platforms, smartphones to actually spread knowledge. Like there's lots of solutions that are only possible right now because the spread of technology wasn't there a couple of years ago. And this is also where it is really exciting. Oftentimes people would ask, like, is it possible to really have an impact and to end hunger? And the answer is yes. We can end hunger if we have the right ideas and we deploy them at scale. There is challenges, there is pandemics, there is wars, and we need to end them. But it is possible to end hunger.
The way technology is helping us now, I like to say, is really moving what we see in terms of school feeding programs at the moment, which is really a 20th century kind of operation into the 21st century. And what that means, what that looks like at the moment, is automating and putting in more systems in terms of, as I was saying, monitoring better the programs remotely, how to merge together different data sets so that we can understand at the same time how much are these programs costing, who is eating what are the stocks in every school, where do we have potential problems that we need to focus on, how do we look at also combining vulnerabilities and where are people with more needs with where are these programs being located. So issues around targeting of the programs. So around the issue of efficiency and how do we make sure that these programs are also as transparent and accountable as possible while at the same time being cost efficient. That I would say is the challenge right now. And it is really about how to make these operations smoother for the children that we serve right now. If we look maybe 10 years from now and you ask me what my dream is, first of all, I would like every child in the world that needs a meal in school to get that meal in school. And we know that we have around 73 million children that are living in extreme poverty that don't have access to these programs right now and before the COVID crisis. Right now, it's much more, many more children. So we already knew before the COVID crisis that we had a huge gap that we needed to fill. But what the programs would look like in the future, if I start to dream a little bit, what I would like to see is, for example, programs that are specifically tailored to the needs of the particular child. So how do we enhance our ability to understand what that family situation is, family per family? Are we talking about single parent households? Are we talking about children that have specific vulnerabilities? Are we talking about children that have disabilities? Are we talking about children that have specific nutritional requirements? And it would be wonderful if we could see programs that are addressing the specific needs of that child in every school, in every country. That would mean, of course, enhancing our ability to have vision, to have visibility within each household and being able to build vulnerability indices and analyses per family, per child to be able to target that support. And of course, it would mean re-engineering the programs so that we can have almost an individualized approach to the support that children get. The other solution also to ensure that these programs are affordable and that they don't become, completely out of reach is that some families really need meals that are free because they don't have the support, they don't have the income to even afford that meal in school for their children or to send them a lunchbox. But there are other families that are better off. And those families, for example, can afford to pay a percentage of that meal. Let's say that they pay 50% of the meal and the other 50% is free. And then we have other families that really are super well off that can pay for the whole meal. And so children really, when they get to school, they would have a little card or a little voucher where they swipe it and then the system itself knows this child gets a free meal, this child gets 20% of a subsidy, this child gets 50% of a subsidy. But that sort of advanced knowledge of what do children and their families need, what is their income status, and how do we connect that to a charging system so that we are sharing the costs among society would be also a really important innovation to be able to live in a world where the better off amongst ourselves are also sharing the meal, literally, with the children that need it the most in real time.
Bernhard, so can you tell us about what is your dream for the future of the Innovation Accelerator?
One program that we've been working on since last year is what we call WFPX. WFPX is our moonshot exploration for the future of humanitarian response. And so we even made it on the finalist list of Fast Company's World Changing Ideas Awards last year with it. And what's so exciting about it is that we really try to use this lens of future thinking, design thinking, as well as super localizing solutions for challenges that we think will be there in the next 5 to 10 years. So what we worked on last year in particular, among a couple of moonshots, was we've been looking at the future of urban nutrition, knowing that we'll have more mega cities and like that there will be more urbanization most likely. Also in developing countries, what is actually required, knowing that when like some of the social tissue that you have in more rural areas, some of the safety nets that are informal, like how would you actually deal with that? And so that was something that we're really excited about. And so we are right now actually using the same lens in this very moment for COVID-19, trying to take also some future technology, how it could be applied even right now. And so if you ask me, like in the next 10 years, where I think there is going to be some developments that will be in our favor, specifically with regards to technology, availability of technology, smartphones, internet connectivity. There's lots of enablers on the ground up that will enable us to make the world more equal, to have opportunities that are spread for people and children that are in most need to actually have those opportunities. And I'm really excited about a world where it's not about like where you've been born, why you've been born in a particular country, but it's you have the same opportunities to get education, to have access to live a productive life, to be healthy, and actually have a fulfilling future for yourself and your family. And now I do believe that yes, there will be further challenges, and those will not go away most likely. But there is the opportunity that through new technologies and like if we're really working towards like getting the networks together of people from private sector, from academia, from the civil society, from international organizations and governments, like if we're all pulling into the same direction, we can really change this.
We're seeing a lot of interesting, well, actually, we're seeing the whole food sector being revolutionized right now. I know here in California, we have a company called Iron Ox that it's growing foods robotically. I was able to buy basil grown by a robot here. There's also so much happening in cultured meat, growing meat and protein in bioreactors. How long do you feel like it will take? And maybe that's the wrong question, but for the people that you're working with, the most vulnerable people, do you think these technologies will help them? And how far away are we from that? Or maybe you're working on some of these initiatives already.
Well, what's really exciting for us that some of those companies that work on these futuristic concepts for developed countries also have a mission to really have global impact. So they actually turn to us and like approach us with solutions that they think can be relevant for developing countries. So oftentimes that's not exactly the same, and you might not need the exact same solution for developing countries too, but like there is variations of them that can be very relevant. So think about leapfrogging stages of development. Like let's say you have a voice assistant. So maybe people don't have to learn to read and write anymore, but you have a voice assistant on your phone who's telling you when to sow, when to harvest, and actually how to have efficient agriculture. Like these are exciting things that, you know, maybe they have been initially developed for developed countries like the US, but then it can be super affordable for people in developing countries too, as soon as you have the right technologies there and like you have connectivity. And then when you talk about other solutions, like it might be that, for instance, like when you look at fortification of food, so for instance, like could be vitamins or minerals or different other aspects of how you actually have a rich diet that keeps you healthy. There's different elements in there that have to do with, you know, personalized medicine if you want to, but like also like how you actually get that type of food. Like we're seeing developments also where whatever can actually help us in some of these more extreme environments, like let's say if there's a drought or if there is food that can stay healthy and actually like edible longer. Like there's lots of different ways how you can actually adapt those concepts. But it's also something that we have to be clear that's not, you know, one solution will be the silver bullet for everything. I think it's going to be a multitude of solutions that coming together, they can make a difference.
And do you also see local innovation with the communities that you're working with? Also, you know, people who are so close to the problem, developing solutions that you think can spread out across the globe?
we are seeing lots of exciting innovations from developing country too. Like for instance, we've been having an innovation in our program that's called GrainMate. We actually invited them last year to our Silicon Valley Innovation Bootcamp, and they were the winner of the Jurist Choice Award. And what they do is they have an IoT device that can measure the humidity in grains. So that way you can make sure as a farmer in developing countries that the grain that you're actually putting into storage is dry and will have the quality and will retain the quality. We've also been seeing other startups like Hello Tractor from Nigeria that's essentially like an Uber-based concept for ride sharing just for tractors. That's expanding, and like there's lots of other innovations that we've been seeing from across the world, and it actually doesn't matter where you're coming from, depending on it's just that teams typically have different challenges. Sometimes teams from the US may have challenges understanding the real challenges from the developing countries, whereas an innovation that's coming from a developing country, maybe they don't have the same role models, maybe they don't have the same mentors, and they just need support to help them find a sustainable business model. And so like, while the challenges might be different, they also have unique advantages in pushing their startups forward.
Carmen, do you see any innovations coming out in terms of like the future of education and the future of learning, the future of what schools might look like?
In terms of the future of education, of course, this crisis has probably forced us and leapfrogged the issue of online learning and how do we ensure that children get the best possible support through online solutions, digital solutions. What has been uncovered, I would say, is the huge disparities that we see in the world between children that have access to online learning tools, starting from computers, tablets, to internet connections, and even the ability to be able to do most of the things that children in well-off families can do. So there's a huge disparity depending on where you were born, depending on where you live. You either have access to that sort of opportunity or not. And so that's one issue that hopefully can get solved soon, is the issue of connectivity and access to digital solutions for children learning. The other one, of course, is as this starts to move and we look at different remote mechanisms for learning, what we have seen during the crisis also is how to support entire families, with families that have parents that are working, children that are also at home, and how do you balance those two things? How do parents support their children while also participating in their own work sessions, etc. We've seen a lot of news about that lately, that parents are broken because of the huge challenges that they're having to face. So the other issue, of course, is how does this look like into a family configuration where children, of course, need education, but there's an environment there that also needs to be looked at. I would say also we need to look beyond, look at the edges, look at the boundaries of where we are. The next big push, especially in developing countries that we are most concerned about, is universal access to secondary education, something that we take very much for granted in developed countries. But in the last 15 years, we've been very successful at bringing all children in primary education into school. Enrollment rates in all countries across the board have skyrocketed. Most of the countries are among beyond 90% of enrollment rates. So we've done a huge, very important job there. But secondary education continues to be a challenge. Issues around disparities for girls, for children with disabilities, and children that have specific needs also need to be addressed. And of course, one of the biggest challenges of all is if we get children in school, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're learning anything. So how do we innovate? How do we evolve into education systems that are actually teaching children how to think for themselves, how to solve problems, and how to be better citizens in the future?
So I feel like I've been jumping a little bit around between topics, but did both of you feel like you got to give like a overview of your work and the challenges that you're currently facing
Another exciting activity that we've actually done as World Food Program is we've partnered with the X Prize on the Global Learning X Prize, which was funded by Elon Musk actually, which was about like teaching basic reading, writing and math to children, self-learning on tablets. And that actually just closed last year. And WFP provided the field testing in Tanzania to make sure this can actually be tested in field locations. Like it's open source software that's now available to children. And it's exciting to see that some of these things can already work. And sometimes it can be done by a startup, sometimes it can be done by X Prize, like an incentive competition. And so these are really exciting developments that we are seeing as well, that you might have thought years ago that this is impossible, but you can make a difference also sometimes by just working on crazy ideas.